Thank you. 1,000 may fall at your side, 10,000 close at hand, but death shall fall short of you. You will see it with your eyes. You will witness the punishment of the wicked, because you took Adonai as your haven. No harm will befall you. No disease will touch your tent. They will carry you in their hands, lest you hurt your foot on a stone. You will safely tread on cubs and vipers, fearlessly step on lions and asps. As God has said, I will deliver those devoted to me. I will protect those who know my name. When they call on me, I will answer. By being there in time of trouble, by rescuing and honoring, by satisfying with long life and revealing my salvation. As we accompanied the casket from the hearse to the grave, you may have noticed that we stopped 7 times. I want to acknowledge my colleague, Rabbi Berel Levertov, a teacher, a friend, a colleague of Bob Sachs, who's here with us today as well. Rabbi Levertov reminded me that we wanted to make sure to stop 7 times, which is a tradition that I'm familiar with. But I have to tell you, I decided to look it up to see why it is that we do that. And I know you won't believe this, but there are probably 6 different explanations for why we do this. But the one that I think Bob Sachs would have appreciated the most is the fact that there's a passage in Ecclesiastes that says, "Vanity of vanities," said Kohelet, "vanity of vanities, all is vanity." And then the question is, what does that have to do with stopping 7 times? Well, the rabbis say there are 7 vanities, but if you count them, there's actually only 5. Vanity of vanities, said Kohelet, vanity of vanities, all is vanity. But each vanities, the plural, has to be at least 2. And so the rabbis, by some tremendous mathematical derivation, came up with 7 times to stop because of 7 vanities. I think Bob would have appreciated that explanation. The Jewish people respond to death with 3 words of blessing. In English, the words mean, "Praised is the judge of truth." So we begin with the wisdom of Jewish tradition. I'll ask you to repeat these words of blessing after me. Baruch, Dayan, Emet. Praised is the judge of truth. My rabbi's manual has the next passage, but I'm not going to read it from there. I'm going to read it from a different source. I'm going to read it from this copy of the book of Job that I just happen to have on my shelf. Oh, yes, it says a new translation with in-depth commentary by Robert D. Sack. And there, Bob tells us, the Lord gives and the Lord takes. Blessed be the name of the Lord. I already made mention of the book of Ecclesiastes. And in the words of Ecclesiastes, a season is set for everything, a time for every experience under heaven, a time for dancing and a time for wailing, a time for birthing and a time for dying, a time for speaking and a time for silence, a time for seeking and a time for losing. The time of mourning is a complicated time filled with many emotions and memories, both bitter and sweet. So we incorporate psalms and prayers, passages from Jewish texts, and by doing that, we link Bob Sax's life with the multi-thousand-year-old tradition of the people of Israel and the eternity of God. So I'm going to turn next to a passage from Psalm 18, which felt to me very appropriate for Bob Sachs. With the loyal, you deal loyally. With the blameless, blamelessly. With the pure, you act purely. And with the perverse, you are wily. It is you who deliver lowly folk, but haughty eyes you humble. It is you who light my lamp. Adonai, my God, lights up my darkness. With you, I can rush a barrier. With my God, I can scale a wall. The way of God is perfect. The word of Adonai is pure. God is a shield to all who seek refuge. And now from one of the prophets, Malachi. And as I recite this brief passage from the book of Malachi, chapter 2, verse 6, I'll encourage you to think of Bob and see if this doesn't seem to fit him. True instruction was on his lips, and he did not give voice to injustice. He walked with Adonai in peace and honesty, and he turned many away from sin. And now I want to read a passage from the book of Job, but I'm going to read it from Bob's translation. There is no replacing a person of wisdom. There is a mine for silver and a place where gold is made pure. Iron is taken from the earth, and the rock is made to flow with copper. There is no replacing a person of wisdom. That's Bob Sachs, and there's no replacing him. This next passage comes from a book that didn't make it into the Jewish Bible. I don't think Bob's teachings and learning stopped with the Jewish Bible. I think he went well beyond that. And so I'm sure he wouldn't mind if we share a passage from the wisdom of Ben Sirach. We are all destined to die. We share it with all who ever lived, with all who ever will be. Cry for the dead. Hide not your grief. Do not restrain your mourning. But remember that continuing sorrow is worse than death. When the dead are at rest, let their memory be a source of peace and be consoled when the soul departs. Death is better than a life of pain, and eternal rest is better than constant sickness. Let us not seek to understand what is too difficult for us, nor search for what is hidden, nor be preoccupied with what is beyond, for we have been shown more than we can comprehend. As a drop of water in the sea, as a grain of sand on the shore, are our few days in eternity. The good things in life last for a short time, but a good reputation endures forever. I suspect that every one of you knows that Bob's reputation is going to last forever. I'd like to ask Rabbi Levertov to recite Psalm 23 for us, please.
Song of David. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He caused me to lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. He restores my soul. He leads me in paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Even when I walk in the valley of darkness, I will fear no evil. You are with me. Your rod and your staff, I am comforted. You set a table before me in the presence of my adversaries. You anointed my head with oil, my cup overflows. May only goodness and kindness pursue me all the days of my life. I will dwell in the house of the Lord length of days. As my colleague said, I don't think Bob would appreciate this translation. So therefore, let's say it in the original Hebrew, those who follow, Mizmor LeDavid, Adonai Rohi Lo Efsar. V'ne'od deshe yarbitzeni al ein menukot ina haleini. Nafshi yishoved, yancheni b'maglei tzedek l'mar shemo. Gam ki elech b'geitz al mavet, lo irara ki ata imadi. Shifticha v'mish'antecha hema yinachamuni. Tarot lefanai shulchan, neged soloi. Vishanta v'shemen roshi, osi rebaya. Ach tov v'chesed yudukuni, kol yemei chayai, shafti vet Adonai le'orech yamim.
So I'm going to have Rabbi Levertov say a few words about Bob. Then we're going to have the casket lowered into the grave, and we'll begin putting some earth into the grave. I'll start that process by using some of the earth that comes from the land of Israel. And then we're going to ask people to use the shovels and to help fill in the grave. But while that's taking place, I'm going to give people an opportunity to say some words as well. So after Rabbi Levertov, we'll lower the casket. We'll start putting the earth into the grave. And then those who would like to say some words are welcome to come forward while that earth is being filled in.
Oi, it's hard to believe that you're gone. I'm going to address Bob. As Jews, we believe the eternity of the soul. So Bob is with us here still. And I'm going to speak directly to him. It's hard to believe that you're gone. Abba de Berish ben Aaron Shlomo. Your witty smile, your probing mind, your questions, your explanations. What an amazing person you were. What a life you lived. Just 2 weeks ago, we were sitting in your home discussing life and community. It looked like you would live on forever. When I visited your home for the first time, I was surprised by all the steps and the ups and downs of the hallways. You explained that you built these to challenge yourself so you don't become complacent. Wow. Just wow. And then we started studying Talmud at Chabad, a weekly study with a dedicated group. We studied Sanhedrin Judges. I was hoping to complete a 113-page book in a year or two. But that's not how you studied. It took us 5 months of weekly study to complete 3 pages maybe. After 5 years, we were on page 22. You were not satisfied with superficial study and exploration. You wanted to figure out why and who and when. King Saul, King David, Samuel the prophet, they came alive when you spoke of them. You would try to see their inner struggles and triumphs. Why was Samuel upset when the Jewish nation asked for a king? Why did he give them a king when they asked? Why was God not happy when they asked for a king? If it clearly makes sense to the people to have a single leader with authority over them. Then you randomly ask, what do you think about Job chapter 6, verse 20? I'm like, I have no idea. Chapter 6, verse 20 states, but let's have a look. You expected us, everyone, to be well-versed in Job as you were. Fair enough. I have to tell you, I have a long way to go. And the prayers. Your sweet voice rang through the synagogue when we prayed, insisting on reciting every word, despite how difficult it was for you. And you're always one stop for the visiting young rabbinical students, eager to learn about the community and interact with people. A visit and a discussion about scriptures and literature was mandatory for whoever visited Santa Fe. Thank you for welcoming them and a deep discussion that usually came out with a feeling of appreciation and a new way of looking at things. And you were always willing to wrap tefillin with us, despite the difficulties of wrapping them in your arm and hand, making sure that each wrap was perfect. I especially remember the times you came to wrap tefillin to pray in honor of my birthdays every year. And your dancing. Your dancing was legendary. Yes, you insisted in joining the circles of dance on Simchat Torah, on Purim, and other joyous occasions. You put others who were reluctant to shame. I recall a few Simchat Torah celebrations when we were doing somersault as we danced. You got down on your knees and insisted on doing somersaults. I was also privileged to get a ride with you in your car while you were driving. A miracle in itself. The drinking of scotch with a straw, with a direct one swig. Those were all legendary. When I visited the hospital in October, you had covered and running a high fever. You said that you were moving to assisted living in Albuquerque because life was catching up with you. But then a few weeks later, you were back home and doing pretty well. We thought you would pull through this one as well, but that wasn't meant to be. You were born on Yom Kippur, the holiest day of the Jewish year, and you passed away right before Purim, the most joyous day in the Jewish calendar. But Purim and Yom Kippur are associated. The word in Hebrew, in the Torah, it's called Yom Kippurim. It has the word Purim inside. Our sages say that whatever you could accomplish through fasting on Yom Kippur, you could accomplish with celebrating on Purim, a day of deep connection from the depth of our hearts to the depths of God. You leave us a legacy of books, wisdom, perseverance, wit, probing, community. You taught us how to challenge ourselves both materially and mentally. Lech v'shalom, go in peace. Rise to greater heights in your Torah studies and send us blessings down here, for we need them desperately.
Thank you.
Joel? I'm going to suggest that those who would like to contribute to the mitzvah of filling in the grave come around on this side on my left. And those who would like to say a few words, maybe come around on my right. I'm going to have Joel, Bob's nephew, begin with some words.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Rabbi Shlachter and Rabbi Levertov. And thank you to all of Bob's good friends who've come here to witness this blessed event. Bob was my mother's youngest brother. Bob was born in Akron in 1931, Ohio. And as you know, he was born with cerebral palsy, the result of substantial oxygen deprivation during a very troublesome birth from my grandmother. But Bob was very lucky because his parents, Saul and Ada Sachs, would not let Bob be institutionalized, as was often common at the time, nor would he be denied the opportunity to participate in whatever challenges he wanted to attempt. He was encouraged by them to take advantage of any and all opportunities to sharpen his skills. Did you ever try to help Bob when you saw him struggling with something? I hope not. He would shoot you a glare that you knew immediately this was his challenge and he was going to do it. If he needed help, he would ask for it. He graduated from Akron Bookville High School in 1949, the year I was born. He would often walk from his high school, which was only half a block from my parents' house, and have lunch with my mom, and then take a look at his newborn nephew. When I was 3 was the first time I really became aware of Bob, and at that point, he was an undergraduate student at St. John's in Annapolis. And every time he would come back to Akron, I would have so much fun playing with him. Bob was fearless. He took on challenges that more able-bodied folk would shrink, from which they would shrink. He often traveled overseas to study in Paris or Jerusalem. And then he received his PhD from Johns Hopkins, joined St. John's as tutor, and eventually, when the opportunity came, he came to Santa Fe when the campus was opened here. I've been blessed with 5 grandchildren. One is Joseph, my son Jonathan's son. He celebrated his bar mitzvah in September of 2022. When nearly a year in advance, we invited Bob to attend my grandson's service. Bob noted that that would be around the same time as his 91st birthday, and he would welcome the opportunity and honor to have an aliyah. And he also noted, and we'll go back to the mathematical of 7 and 13, Bob noted that his 91st birthday would be his 7th bar mitzvah anniversary, since 13 times 7 is 91. And it was such an honor to see him chanting Torah, reciting his parsha on the bima with his great-grandnephew. The next day, we had a beautiful birthday party for Bob with at least 30 of his family members in attendance. Another one of our grandchildren is Asher, who's my daughter Marissa's oldest son. He is just turning 12 in April, so a year from now, he will be celebrating his bar mitzvah. Asher was also born with cerebral palsy, also because of severe oxygen deprivation. And he and Bob shared a very common and very close bond. In those 12 years, there was never a time that Bob would call me. He wouldn't ask how Asher was doing, how was his physical therapy, his occupational therapy, his speech therapy. When Asher learned that Bob's passing, he was very sad because he wanted Bob to be on FEMA with him. As many of you know, one of Bob's greatest pleasures was to be able to Skype with his friends around the world. Whether it was discussing ancient Greek poetry, or some aspect of physics, or to speculate on the root of some Hebrew verb, or to discuss his favorite movies, which is what he and I have been doing most recently. You will be pleased to know he just finished watching all the Humphrey Bogart films and Burt Lancaster movies. And his favorite actor now is Viggo Mortensen. So anytime you watch any of those movies, I hope you, as well as I, will remember Bob fondly. Thank you very much.
Others who would like to say a few words?
Hi, I'm Judy Moore-Krishnan. Bob and I have been friends for over 30 years. We did not meet in Santa Fe. I'd just like to share with you how we met, because I think it was really unusual and actually extraordinary, as we'll see. We met in Jerusalem. I was there with my husband for a physics conference, and when it came time to go home, I didn't want to go home. I was madly in love with Israel and Jerusalem. So Bob came home by himself. I stayed on for a week or so, and I checked into the YMCA, which is called Yimka. Israelis call it Yimka, since we're Jewish. And the next morning, I was having breakfast in Verdun. And I looked across the room and saw this place. And he looked unusual. And I remember thinking, he looks like a professor, which in fact he was. And then I noticed he had some breakfast. And I remember thinking, he looks like he's by himself. He's managing. This is pretty interesting. Then a little while later, we met in the lobby and introduced each other, introduced ourselves. And I think it's Bob who must have said, "Where are you from?" And I said, "Santa Fe, New Mexico, where are you?" And he said, "Santa Fe, New Mexico." Wow, what a coincidence that. So we started chatting and we decided to team up to explore Jerusalem. So we did that for the next few days. And one of the things that I remember so clearly is we were in the old city and we wanted to sign up for a tour in the city of David. And we had to go to this office. We had to sign something. So I signed it. Bob got down on his knees, took a pen in his mouth, and signed. And I was in tears. I thought, I don't believe this. This is what he has to go through to be out in the world. Anyhow, we had a lot of fun in the next few days. And when we came back to Santa Fe, we met with friends and have been so ever since. And I want to just say one more thing. I hadn't seen Bob for the last 2 years, and I hadn't heard from him. And towards the end of January 30th, I received a call from him, left a message. And I thought, why is he calling me now? And then it occurred to me, he's calling sick. So I called him back, and that was indeed why he was calling. And what he wanted to talk about was Jerusalem. He wanted to reminisce about how he had met Jerusalem and all the details. And that's what we did. That was most of our last conversation. And I'm just so grateful that he thought to do that. I thought that was ridiculous. And of course, I'm grateful for the friendship for over 30 years. So that's my story. Thank you. Hi.
Others who would like to speak? Did you want? You sure? No rush. Well, you're here. Go ahead.
When I first joined the faculty at St. John's, Bob was my first friend and most enduring. He was the found of the freshman mathematics he was teaching. And after a session of that, we walked for lunch toward the student union building, talking, and I wasn't paying attention to where we were until I discovered we were halfway down this very rough trail above the fish pond. And I thought, how am I going to get him down? There was no problem. He got down by himself. And I later learned from him, when I discovered that that path was no longer possible, the college had removed it and remodeled that path so that he couldn't go down it anymore because he was so worried about it. But I had learned not to worry about him at all. If he could do it, he would do it. That was all.
I met Bob about 7 years ago here. We moved from LA and we live in El Dorado, and I was going to a synagogue here, and there was Bob, and somebody came up to me and said, "Can you give him a ride home because you're on the way?" And sure, so that developed a friendship. We would take him back and forth many times, and I would sit with him in the synagogue and turn pages for him so we could follow along together. And I remember a lot of the conversations we had, and one of the things he just kept repeating more than once, or twice, was don't go to extremes. He was very, we talk about politics, and he said extremism is destroying our country and the world. And I really appreciate that, finding the middle ground and not being divisive. And that was a message that stayed with me from Bob, and I just wanted to share that. Thanks a lot.
Are there others who would like to speak? Please.
My name's Tina O'Sorgan, and I came into a family that had taken Bob in when I met my husband. My husband's father was a Russian Orthodox Christian priest, but he was a member of our family, that family. So I just wanted that to be represented. He was at my daughter's first birthday party, which she's now 43 or something like that. So it's been a while. But what I wanted to say right here and now today is thank you to these caregivers that were so good to us. At the end, I don't know if it's been said, but I sat down with Litzy and we had a nice visit. Will was there. I didn't get the chance to meet the others, but I heard they're great. And he was amazing. He was translating for Bob for us. Those of us who have known him 40 years, he just tuned into him, got him 100%, was so there for him. Bob would turn to him and say, tell him what I said, or what did he say, or whatever. It was a beautiful thing to watch. So I just really wanted you to know how grateful we are for care.
Hi, my name is Ari, and I met Mr. Sachs in the 90s when I was a student at St. John's. I just moved from Israel. And in Bob, I met a lot of security and just a wealth of knowledge. At the time, if you can imagine, Israel was in turmoil, as it always tends to be. And he had a presence about him that reminded me, when I was confused in my heart, keep asking questions, keep looking at the root of words, and when in doubt, come over for dinner. You will be very missed. Thank you.
Are there others? Please.
I knew Bob. I guess the main reason why I'm talking is because I don't see anybody else from the study group here today. But I studied with Bob and a number of other people from Bob at Orthodox synagogue. Bob was very interesting. You know, Rambam is very difficult to understand, guides perplexed, and we would get into the Hebrew translations and then get into the original Arabic if it was necessary. So it was a very interesting experience.
Hi, I'm Juliana Santianes. I'm Tina's niece from the Asorgan family, and Bob has, well, I told him the last time I saw him, you've known me my whole life. You've been a part of my family my whole life. And he said, way, way, way before that. He was my senior advisor at St. John's, and his question, I had an essay all written, but then he asked a question about Archimedes, and to this day, it continues to impact my life. And his sense of wonder, he asked, what would the poet think? And I think about what would Mr. Sachs think, because he was the poet in my life. And when I got to visit him last month, I think I could write another senior essay just on those 3 hours with him. And the first thing he said was, I've heard a voice my whole life that no one else has heard. He kept saying that over and over. No one else has heard this voice. And then he said he had no idea that his voice was affected by cerebral palsy until he heard a recording of himself not too long ago, 5 or 10 years ago. And he thought, why do I keep having to repeat myself? And that is the poet. And I loved him and I love him. And I just wanted to express, I got to tell him that. I said, I hope it's okay I tell you that I love you, because I felt it from the day I met him, and I just adored him. So thank you, Mr. Sachs.
One of the things that I felt was remarkable, as I'm reflecting on Bob, he had a relationship with time that was not at all. I remember when, I think it was around the time that electric can openers came out, and Bob said, I didn't know everybody had cerebral palsy. And I remember when he was a tutor in math, and he would say, this is a circle. And you can imagine with cerebral palsy that it didn't look like the usual circle, nor did it take the same amount of time as the usual circle would take to draw. But Bob didn't have a problem with it. And I think that he communicated things without stating them, as everybody knows. He just communicated so many things just by the way he did things and by the way he reflected on things. My memories of Bob are that he was easygoing, and I just don't remember him ever being negative. And he was just very gracious.
Thank you.
Met Bob 20 years ago through a mutual friend. Many years later, I lost my home and I moved out of town. And I got an email from Bob later. And he asked me if I would like to come back to New Mexico. I said yes, and I did. I took care of Bob for about 3.5 years. He was a friend, he was a teacher, he was a father. I remember whenever I would take him out to work, we would meet people, everybody would go, Dr. Sachs, Dr. Sachs. And I said, wow, everybody in Santa Fe knows you. And he said, well, if they don't know me, they know you, so maybe we should team up and run. Maybe we should team up and run for mayor. But for as long as I knew Bob, he never had anything negative to say about anybody. He was kind to everybody, no matter what. He shared his knowledge with whoever was willing to exchange that knowledge with him. He was interested in your culture, wherever you came from. And I know that he is in a better place, but it doesn't make it any easier. I will miss him so much.
You can stay there.
Just a note. I, along with Israel, transported Bob back and forth, had the opportunity to synagogue, and that's how we became friends. And, you know, I just fell in love with the guy. I loved him for a couple of things. He was always positive. I never heard him complain or anything. He was like a ray of sunshine all the time. And secondly, he saw no limitation. You know, he just, you know, think about it. He had a severe disability and he, you know, went to school and became a professor and, you know, wouldn't take the acceptance of limitation. And also that he was an embodiment of acceptance. And acceptance is really a key to everyone's life. You know, that acceptance is key to serenity and wisdom. And he was just a beautiful man. We had an opportunity in the last year to cook for him, and he loved that. We go over to his property and that bumpy road, and he's just a beautiful man, and I love him very much as other people.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Lance?
I was thinking about Bob. I'm going to go back a long way. I grew up here in Santa Fe, and my dad, who died in 1981, was talking about his friend when I was very young that had a tricycle. And I knew it was Bob, but I wasn't for sure. I remember asking Bob, I said, was that, my dad was telling me, I have a recollection of my father telling me about helping his friend out with a tricycle. Was that you? He said, yes, that was me. And I gave Bob a ride home and I got to see his house. And when you see someone's house, you kind of get to know a little bit more about them. And it was special. It wasn't large, but it was special. And I was very glad I got to see his home. And after that, I had called him a couple times and he never answered. And I think I emailed him and he said, I can't get to the phone fast enough, so you got to let it ring a long time. And I didn't think about that. But I guess the one message for me that I'll remember about Bob is that maybe we saw that he had difficulties, but he achieved so much as an author and, you know, had family and friends that loved him and students. But many of us that don't have the disability will never achieve half of what he achieved. So I will say Cheers to you, Bob. Shalom. And I'm definitely a better person for knowing you.
You've all been standing for quite a while. Let me suggest that I'm going to share just a few of my own remarks, and then we'll do some concluding prayers. And anybody who hasn't had a chance to share their memories so far, there's going to be a reception in the chapel building, and you're welcome to share your remarks in there. I'll try not to be too repetitious of what we've heard from others. And I just wanted to start with some more biblical teaching. A man there was from the land of Ohio, and his name was Bob. He was a simple and straightforward man, a God-fearing man who turned away from evil. After many years of study, teaching, writing, lecturing, mentoring, and always learning, and after decades of a hugely successful academic career, despite the hardships of cerebral palsy, Bob said, "Naked I came out of my mother's belly, and naked I shall return. The Lord gives and the Lord takes. Blessed be the name of the Lord." But throughout all that, Bob never sinned or even charged God with folly. Well, maybe he rarely sinned. So those passages were taken verbatim from Bob's translation of the book of Job. I just turned the letter J into a B. It was pretty straightforward. And I interpolated a little bit. And okay, the land of Oots became the land of Ohio, but it's pretty close. I don't think he would have minded. I had the honor and privilege to know Dr. Robert D. Sachs for several years, though not nearly as long as some of you knew him. And the one who had probably the most distant memories of Bob, I would guess, is his nephew, Joel, who is here today. And he honored Bob by flying in from Ohio, on a highly non-direct route because of a dearth of flights resulting from a plethora of spring break travelers. I think Bob would have appreciated the non-direct path toward an ultimate goal. It sort of hints at his style of thinking through complex issues in a way that seemingly was outside the box, but got him to the end state with brilliance and originality. And I wanted to thank in particular the person who acknowledged the caregivers, because I too had written into my remarks that the caregivers deserve our thanks for helping keep Bob going for so long. Bob was a most welcome congregant at Chabad. You heard about his experiences there from Rabbi Levertov. He was also a welcome congregant at Hamakom, where I serve as a rabbi. And even more than his participation in our services at Hamakom on Saturday mornings, Bob participated in a very lively Talmud discussion each week. But we didn't know what Rabbi Levertov said, that Bob was going to slow things down, and we kept charging through. So in the course of the time that Bob was with us, we made it through probably 18 folios of Talmud. And I would say that Bob masterfully helped the Johnnies who attended that session, and he helped those of us who were Johnny wannabes. And he helped us explicate this hallowed text, which documents the discourses of ancient rabbis. I think Bob would have appreciated that in just a few weeks, we're going to complete that tractate, and we're going to have a festive meal on the day that begins the holiday of Passover in the evening. And by having that festive meal, those who are firstborns don't have to fast. And I think Bob would have loved to participate in that celebration with us. In preparation for these remarks, I have to tell you, the internet is amazing. I went out and Googled Robert D. Sachs, St. John's. You'd be amazed what you can find there. And I listened to remarks from Phil LeCure, from Howard Fisher, from Ron Duncan Hart, from Steve Ovitsky. And some of these remarks were made during a much-deserved Santa Fe Jewish Book Council Lifetime Achievement Award. I think that was 7 years ago. Ron told the audience that Bob was a scholar whose interests and expertise ranged from the Bible to Socrates, from Shakespeare to Newton, and that Bob was a scholar of languages from the Celtic dialects to the tongues of the Berbers. Howard said that his first impressions of Bob were gleaned over 5.5 decades ago on the Annapolis campus of St. John's College, where both were tutors. And Howard shared the experiences he and others here enjoyed learning biblical Hebrew from Bob. I understand what Howard captured when Howard said that Bob had an ability to see connectedness where others see only discretization. And when I read Bob's essay on Shakespeare's The Tempest, I could see how Bob pushed me to see parallels in the play to God and Moses. I never would have made that parallel. And he also made parallels to the Greek philosophers. I think that was really Bob's style. I read the following passages, maybe from some of you here. One student said, his self-created method of teaching Hebrew was extraordinary. It was like an archaeological dig of the mind. He gave us a few tools, namely consonant groupings, and we used these to excavate meanings from the texts. He was also a wonderful advisor for people's senior essays. And my favorite student quote, and I think this echoes somebody here, it just said, I love him. He helped me with my senior essay. He's such a sweetheart and a profound thinker. Last May, I looked on my calendar. It was last May, I attended an event at St. John's, and it was part of the Dean's Lecture Series. The event was entitled On the Biblical Geometrical Political Mind, a panel in honor of Bob Sachs with panelists Seth Applebaum, Phil LeCure, April Olsen, and Ken Wolfe. And then about 6 months later, Solomon Cordova wrote, in a poignant gathering earlier this year, the St. John's Santa Fe community convened within the Great Hall to pay homage to Tutor Emeritus Robert Bob Sachs, the college's longest serving faculty member who is also an alum. The event recognized Bob's invaluable contributions to the college's living traditions, and it celebrated his book, Three Wells, which was a collection of his writings brought to fruition by tutors Janet Doherty, Phil LeCure, J. Walter Sterling, and Howard Fisher. By way of brief biography, you already heard Bob was born in Akron, Ohio in 1931. And Bob's childhood was centered on a family that was quite liberal in its Jewish practice. Bob recalls worship services which incorporated Lutheran hymnal music for the Jewish liturgy. We chose not to do that today. But his grandfather, who clearly had a strong influence on Bob, spoke Yiddish and followed a more traditional Judaism. As Bob was growing up, he was fascinated by the concept of combining chemicals and forming something new. He actually thought he would become a chemist. But in a way, Bob's academic work was indeed a form of chemistry. He used words and ideas rather than chemical ingredients. I think Bob influenced not just one generation, not just 2 generations, but I don't know, maybe 5 generations of students. His legacy is really profound. And I think Bob will forgive me if I bring this tribute to a close without capturing more than a fleeting glimpse of this great man. So I turn again to Bob's commentary on the book of Job as I reflect on Bob's last weeks. This is from his book, page 154. Thoughts of the finality of death have tired Bob, and now he is slowly drifting off into a wonderful daydream in which 2 worlds begin to blur and merge into a single world. All the contradictions are gone. There is calling and answering. The hands that made Bob no longer devour him, but instead love him. It is a wide world full of room for man and room for God. And so Bob died, an old man, contented with his days. May his memory be for a blessing, and let us all say Amen.
Rabbi, I think in honor of Bob, they dug a little deep.
I'm sure they did. The dust returns to the earth as it was, but the spirit returns to God who gave it. May Bob Sachs's soul be bound up in the bond of life eternal. Send comfort, Adonai, to those who mourn. Grant strength to those whose burden is sorrow. And let us all say, Amen. It's a traditional passage called El Male Rachamim, and if I'm not mistaken, you probably have that in your booklets there. I'm going to chant this in the Hebrew, and you probably have that in the English as well. El Male Rachamim Shochen Pamarot Ametzei Menucha Nechona Ametzei Menucha Nechona Tachat Ganafei Hashechina B'malot Kedoshim U'Tahorim Kezohar Haraki Amazhirim Et Nishmat Abba Dov Beresh Ben Aharon Shlomo Shehalach Leolamo Began Eden Tehei Menuchato Ana Bal Harachamim Astirehu Beseter Kenafecha Leolamim Utzror Bitzror Achayim Et Nishmato Adonai Unachalato Ve'anuach V'shalom Al Mishkavo V'nomar Amen. I didn't look in that booklet, but you probably have a copy of the Mourner's Cottage in there as well. And I'm going to hand this copy over to Joel. Joel is the closest to a mourner that we have here today. The mourners are traditionally defined as parent, child, spouse, or sibling. And Bob has none here today with him. But I think it's appropriate that we listen to the Kaddish prayer recited, and if you would like to recite that along with Joel, you're welcome to do that.
First, I'd like to say Baruch, Jim. Yitgadal ve'yitchadash shemir rabah.
Amen.
Ve'elman yirach yuseh ve'yamlich ma'aseh ve'chayayom ve'yomehom ve'chayei kol beit Yisrael ba'agalah yisman kariv.
Amen.
Yehi Shmei Rabba Levorach Ve'olam Kol Hei Amayim.
Yitbarach ve'yishtabach v'yit'ar v'yitromah v'yitnaseh v'yit'adar v'yit'aven v'yit'ahal shemei dekudshah v'rivu ve'elam yikol birchata v'shirata v'yishbechata v'menechata v'amiran ve'alma v'yiru. Amen. Yeshama Rabba Yishtamaya V'chaim Aleinu V'al Yisrael V'yiru. Amen. Seh Shalom V'yomah V'yaseh Shalom Leinu V'al Kol Yisrael V'yiru. Amen.
Esa Einai El Heharim Me'ayin Yavo Me'ayin, Yavo Ezri, Ve'im Adonai, Oseh Shamayim Ba'aretz, Ezri, Ve'im Adonai, Oseh Shamayim Ba'aretz. If you turn that way, you can turn your eyes to the mountains. And the psalmist asks, from where will my help come? My help comes from Adonai, maker of heaven and earth. Al Mekomo Yavo B'Shalom. May Bob Sachs go unto God in peace. And let us say, Amen.
Bob was a very special person. He was really a match. Although he had some difficulties in our eyes about movement and doing things, but he had no problem whatsoever going anywhere, doing anything. I remember he at one point said, why don't we go for breakfast at Harry Rhodes' house? And I think at that point, we had not gone to that place. So actually, Bob introduced us to that place, and it was really lots of fun. But of course, it was great to be able to tackle any subject with him and to hear him just, expand the subject, just go into all kinds of edges. So it was really very, very special.
I first knew Bob when I was 16 years old and a freshman at St. John's in Annapolis. The first day of my freshman year, I walked into my language tutorial. It was his first day on the faculty. That time, that was 1961. And since that time, he's been a teacher to me at the college, and I studied biblical Hebrew with him at that time. Like life, not in depth as I did later. But then I continued my friendship with him when we were both on the faculty in Santa Fe. We were colleagues. And also at that time, I began more serious biblical Hebrew studies with Howard and Bob, and we met weekly for about 5 years. We translated great hunks of Tanakh, and it was just unmitigated delight. And at that time also, he had this grammar book that was in very casual form. And Howard and I took on to edit that book. And we worked closely with Bob for years. I think it took to get it turned into a real book where all his wonderful insights were clear and available. And we made that beautiful book. And then we made the book on with his translation of Job. And again, that was working closely with him for years to get it all into a beautiful book that was equal to his insights and the breadth of his thinking and the delight of what he could see. That it was scholarly. It showed his amazing depth of knowing the Hebrew. And also it was poetic. He was able to do something that is so rare, that it was so scholarly and poetic too. So that was the book of Job. And then one of his earliest books, he was dealing with from over the years on his work on Genesis. We wanted to bring that forward as a book, because it was out. It had been originally been serialized in a journal interpretations, and then it was pirated by some Russians. They chopped off a piece of it, but that was how it was available. So we undertook to do that, and he completely revised it. He changed his mind about some things and just put into it from other angles. And so that was the third book that we did with him. And there was a wonderful friendship up to the end. And I'm gonna miss him.
Dana mentioned the many rewards that came from trying to edit Bob. And I say trying to because one of the rewards was also one of the greatest frustrations. No matter what you thought he had said, he would have a second thought. And no matter when you thought he had finally formulated that thought, it would turn out that, but there's another side to this. The book publishing art is not quite equipped to handle that kind of thinking. But we did the best we could. I have another story that a number of people have heard, but for me, is the most characteristic story that I know. When I first joined the faculty at St. John's, this was in 1965, I had heard about a tutor named Bob Sachs, but I didn't know anything about him. But one day when I was coming out of my own class, I saw a knot of his laboratory students who were all talking animatedly with one another, trying to figure out what their tutor, Bob Sachs, had meant by his paper assignments. Well, it was common to assign a paper at the end of laboratory, but Bob had assigned his class two papers. The first paper was to be called Why Electricity is Like Water. The second paper was to be called Why Electricity is Not Like Water. I thought, I've got to meet this guy. And very glad that I
did. For those of you who have been here today, thank you very much for being a part of this as we all honor Professor, friend, Bob Sachs.